Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, and this presentation will give a little more context to the Chinese Civil War, because it will look at the early Republican period, a period when Sun Yat-sen, the liberal leader of the Republican movement, lost control of things, when regions broke away from central control under the rule of warlords, and when a revolution from below, that is instigated by the people themselves, the May 4th movement, seemed to offer Sun Yat-sen a second chance, whilst at the same time it led to the formation of the Chinese Communist Party. So a lot went on. The Republic was first dominated by Yuan Shikai, an army general under the Qing dynasty, who accepted the leadership of the Republic, turned it into a dictatorship, and attempted to turn it into an empire again. The details aren't important for you, but it not only meant that Sun Yat-sen was marginalised, but the newly formed parliament was marginalised, before being dissolved altogether. And China was fractured, as in total 7 provinces tried to break away from Yuan's rule before his army crushed the opposition to him. Sun Yat-sen fled to Japan, where he would set up the Alliance League, the forerunner of the Kuomintang. Then, when Yuan declared himself emperor, there were more revolts in the provinces, and also amongst the generals in his army. Yuan backed down, but within 3 months he was dead anyway. So you can see the power vacuum left by the fall of the Qing dynasty was proving difficult to fill. The power vacuum would show even more when power in China splintered into the hands of different warlords in different regions. They were a disparate group. Some had been military governors under Yuan's regime. Others remained loyal to the Qing dynasty. Some held to Confucian values. Others were Christians. Some were reformists. What they all had in common, though, was their armies to defend their territories. The Republican government continued in Beijing, but with little authority. And there was also a nationalist government, but that had even less authority. But there was something else happening in China, the new cultural movement, born out of the Republican movement that had overthrown the Qing dynasty. It wanted China to shed the traditions and values of the past. Young Chinese were attracted to it in increasing numbers, and Beijing University was an important centre. The radical magazine New Youth, established in Shanghai in 1915, became an important influence too. It became the voice of the May 4th movement, more of which in a minute. It also became a Marxist mouthpiece. The new cultural movement held 3 principal beliefs, each linking with the other 2. The first was a belief that a complete change in values and consciousness, a complete cultural revolution based on Western values, was necessary if economic, social and political change was to occur. In particular, individualism, which Confucian thinking, with its emphasis on social order, knowing one's place and respecting authority from father to emperor, denied. There was also an unshakable faith in the power of ideas to bring about social change. And there was the faith the movement held in Chinese youth, uncorrupted by old traditions and more amenable to new ideas and values. China's youth would be the agents of the Cultural Revolution, on which the very existence of China depended. One young student who was influenced by what was happening was Mao Zedong. Well, this was the state of China when the world met in Paris in 1919 to sort out a new world order. And the decision at the peace conference to give Germany's imperialist concessions in Shandong province, the birthplace of China, home of the Yellow Emperor, the Middle Kingdom, and including the important port of Qingdao, to Japan, rather than reinstating full Chinese sovereignty, sparked nationwide protests. These were begun by university students in Beijing on May the 4th, 1919, culminating in attacks on the offices and homes of ministers known to be in the pay of the Japanese. The demonstrations grew larger and more militant as the students were joined by their professors, merchant associations, and by workers, and they spread to every part of China. There was a run on Japanese-owned banks. Chinese newspapers refused to accept advertisements for Japanese businesses, and merchants and shops refused to sell Japanese goods. It led to violent clashes with the police and arrests, which only inflamed nationalist feelings further. In Shanghai, a student-led general strike closed down shops and some factories. Protests spread to some 200 cities in total. Mao only recently returned from Beijing to his home province of Hunan, called for a national boycott of Japanese goods, and started a revolutionary journal. Not only were nationalists aggrieved by the way foreign governments continued to exploit China, but they also pointed to a weak and corrupt Chinese government that allowed it to happen. But beyond the anti-Japanese sentiments was a call for greater democracy and for China to embrace science. A nationwide movement for national renewal had started. It would be called the May 4th movement, and is still seen as one of the most defining moments in China's national revolution. Many historians regard it as more significant than the revolution of 1911 that overthrew the Qing dynasty. Of profound significance was the shift in the way Western thought was viewed. For the West was now seen as oppressors. But this didn't lead the movement to turn its back on Western ideas per se. Rather, it was now felt that China's problems would not be solved by adopting Western democracy and liberalism, but by socialism, itself critical of liberalism and capitalism, and so imperialism. Interest grew in Marxism and the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Marxism seemed to offer a new intellectual model, and the Bolsheviks a political model. Marxism seemed to resolve the dilemma facing Chinese intellectuals. It rejected the liberal capitalist model that had resulted in imperialism, and at the same time it rejected Chinese traditionalism. Nationalism and social revolution could stand side by side. What's more, it seemed to the Chinese intellectuals that they were part of an international revolutionary movement. It led to the resurrection of the Republican nationalists by Sun Yat-sen in 1919, renaming it the Kuomintang in the process. Sun still held to his three principles of the people, first formed in 1905, but always under development. These were first nationalism, eliminate imperialism and restore Chinese sovereignty. Second, democracy, a democratic republic with representative government accountable to the people. And third, people's livelihood, the economic well-being and social welfare of the Chinese people. Influenced by the May 4th movement, he wanted the party to connect with its grassroots, the Chinese people. It also led to the formation of the Chinese Communist Party in 1921 in Shanghai, helped by 2 representatives from the newly formed Comintern. Amongst the small group of revolutionaries who attended the meeting, there were only 12, was the newly converted Mao Zedong. The fledgling party promptly adopted the Leninist model of organization and orthodox Marxist-Leninist aims. A revolutionary army of the proletariat would usher in the dictatorship of the proletariat and replace private ownership with social ownership based on Soviets. In this, it was in line with Comintern aims. Except that whereas the Comintern favoured cooperation with the Kuomintang, a policy of independence, aggression and exclusion was agreed. Small ad hoc communist groups were established in Shanghai and Beijing, as well as provincial cities. For example, Mao formed 2 groups in Hunan to spread Marxist thinking, train themselves as future party activists, and to organise strikes. So you can see the seeds were set for a major clash, and everything was in the mix. A power vacuum that needed filling, ideology, politics and economics, and a continued foreign presence. It needed a trigger, and that would be provided when Chiang Kai-shek took over the leadership of the Kuomintang. But I'll cover that in a separate presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and the very best of luck with your studies. Do sign up for my channel if you haven't already, and tell your friends about it. Cheers.